The road was empty that humid afternoon in Greenville, but the deafening roar of motorcycles shattered the quiet like a thunderclap the devastators stormed into. Town leather jackets, tattoos, and laughter that echoed like a warning of trouble ahead. By a withered fence on the edge of a dirt lot, scouted German shepherd with perfect posture stood motionless. His sharp eyes tracked the men like a hawk eyeing its prey, though retired as a canine and now simply the companion of former Sheriff Tom Callahan. Scouts still carried the spirit of a trained protector, but the men dismounting their bikes didn't see that. To them, he was just a dog, a challenge. Inside the house, Tom felt the disturbance before he even heard it. Looking through the window, he saw Marcus, the gang leader, smirking as he pointed at Scout. The dog stood still, assessing. "Let's see what you've got, tough guy," Marcus sneered, tossing a rock that bounced inches from Scout's paws. Tom flung the door open, shouting for them to back off, but his words were drowned out by the laughter of the bikers. Something in Scout's stance unnerved him. It wasn't fear, it was restraint, a calm tension, like a storm gathering strength before unleashing its fury. The first mistake was touching him. Marcus stepped forward, grabbing Scout's collar with arrogant confidence, and the world seemed to erupt. Scout moved like lightning, his jaws locking onto Marcus's arm with surgical precision. The man's scream ripped through the air, and the other bikers froze as if caught in the grip of something far beyond their control. Scout wasn't just a dog, he was a force of nature. The concrete seemed to tremble under the chaos, boots scuffing the ground, panicked shouts, and the deep guttural growl from Scout that seemed to shake the very air around them. Tom ran faster than he had in years, his breath catching in his chest with every step. Reaching the gate, his voice cut through the mayhem like a knife. Scout let go. The command was absolute, and Scout obeyed, instantly releasing Marcus and stepping back to stand beside Tom, but his eyes never left the group, his body still coiled like a spring ready to strike. Again, Marcus, clutching his blooded arm, glared at Tom with pure hatred. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, old man," he spat, his voice venomous despite the pain, as the engines roared back to life and the gang disappeared. Down the road, Tom dropped to his knees beside Scout, his hand trembling as it stroked the dog still bristling. "This isn't over, buddy," he whispered, his gaze fixed on the lingering dust cloud left behind. Scout remained alert, as if sensing that this day was only the beginning. Silence returned to Greenville, but now it carried a dark day, warning that the worst was yet to come. If you're hooked on this story and want to find out what happens next with Scout and Tom, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more thrilling stories like this. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapters. What will Marcus and the Devastators do next? Tom spent the rest of the evening pacing the length of his small creaking porch. The sun dipped behind the hills, leaving Greenville bathed in an eerie twilight. Scout sat by his side, his ears perked and his eyes fixed on the road, as if expecting the gang's return at any moment. Tom couldn't shake the image of Marcus's face, twisted in pain and rage. That kind of man didn't let things go. And he didn't work alone. "They'll come back," Tom muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Scout, but Scout's low guttural growl in response told him the dog understood the danger all too well. As the last rays of light faded, Tom locked up the house with a precision he hadn't used since his days as sheriff. He double-checked every latch and pulled his old service revolver from the drawer, loading it with hands that felt older and slower than they had a decade ago. Scout followed him through the house, his movements silent but deliberate. When Tom finally sat down at the kitchen table, the weight of it all hit him. He wasn't a young man anymore. If the Devastators came back, it wouldn't just be him and Scout they were after they'd make the whole town pay for the humiliation, and Greenville didn't have the strength to fight back. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional bark of a distant dog or the rustle of wind. Through the trees Tom's mind churned, with worst-case scenarios, his heart heavy with guilt for not doing more to protect Scout. The dog had done what he was trained to do, defend. But Tom couldn't help feeling like he'd failed him by not intervening sooner. "You didn't ask for this," Tom said quietly, running his hand through Scout's fur. The dog leaned into him, steady and calm, as if to remind Tom that they were in this together. Just after midnight, the sound came, a low rumble in the distance, faint but unmistakable. Tom froze, every muscle in his body tightening. Scout's ears shot up, his head snapping toward the window. The motorcycles were coming back. The rumble grew louder, joined by faint, mocking laughter carried on the whine. Tom grabbed his revolver and stood, his chest tight as adrenaline surged through his veins. Scout moved to the door, his body tense and ready, a shadow of his canine days coming alive in the dim light of the porch. But the motorcycles didn't stop. They roared past the house, their headlights cutting through the dark like knives. Tom exhaled sharply, lowering the gun, but not his guard. The gang wasn't here for a fight, at least not yet. They were sending a message, a warning, and as the engines faded into the night, Tom realized that the storm was still gathering. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be a fair fight. The next morning, Greenville woke to an ominous stillness. The town's usual quiet felt heavier, like the air carried a weight no one could shake off. Tom stood on his porch, sipping his coffee, scanning the empty road. Scout sat by his side, as watchful as ever. The events of the previous day hung between them like an unspoken warning. Tom's fingers brushed the grip of his revolver tucked into his waist, and he hadn't slept much, and his instincts screamed that something was about to happen. He just didn't know when or how. It didn't take long to find out. Around mid-morning, the phone rang. Tom hesitated for a moment before answering, his gut twisting. "Callahan," he said gruffly. On the other end was Chief Larson, his former deputy. "Tom, it's bad, real bad," Larson said, his voice tight with urgency. "The devastators hit the Henderson farm last night, tore up the place, broke windows, trashed the barn. Henderson said they left a message for you." Tom's grip on the phone tightened. What kind of message, he asked, though he already knew it wasn't good. "They painted your name on the barn door." And Scout's Tom's stomach churned as he hung up. He turned to Scout, who was already staring at him, his ears twitching as if sensing the tension in the room. "Looks like they're not done with us," Tom muttered, pulling on his boots. He and Scout climbed into his old truck, the engine groaning to life. The drive to the Henderson farm was short, but each mile felt like an eternity. When they arrived, the damage was worse than Tom had imagined. Broken fences, shattered glass, and spray-painted threats scrawled across the barn in bright red letters. "Callahan can't hide, neither can your dog." Scout sniffed the air, his posture stiffening as they walked the property. Tom could feel the unease radiating off him, a reminder that Scout's instincts were never wrong. "They're trying to scare," as Tom said aloud, though the words felt hollow. He knew the gang wasn't just trying to intimidate. They were setting the stage for something bigger. Henderson, an older farmer with a nervous tremor in his hands, approached cautiously. "Tom, I didn't know they'd go this far," he said, his voice trembling. "They said you brought this to our town." Tom clenched his fists, the weight of guilt pressing harder on his chest as they drove back to the house. Tom replayed Henderson's words in his mind. The devastators were out to make a statement, not just to him, but to the entire town. By dragging Greenville into their vendetta, they created a powder keg, and Tom knew it wouldn't take much to ignite it. Scout sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his muscles tense. "We can't Let them win, Scout Tom said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. Scout didn't turn, but the determination in his stillness was enough. They both knew the fight was far from over and it was coming straight for them. K and fell over Greenville with an uneasy quiet. Tom sat in his living room, the revolver resting on the table beside him. Scout lay at his feet, his ears occasionally twitching at the faintest sound from outside. Tom's mind raced with questions. How far would the Devastators go? Would they target more than just him? He couldn't let anyone else in the town suffer because of his fight. As the hours dragged on, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. Sitting still was a mistake. Come on, Scout, he said, grabbing his coat and holstering his weapon. If the gang wanted him, they weren't going to catch him unprepared. Tom loaded Scout into the truck and they headed toward the outskirts of town. The air outside felt heavy, thick with tension. The plan was simple: scout out the roads, keep an eye out for the gang, and maybe get ahead of whatever they were planning. As they drove, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating trees that seemed to close and tighter with every mile. Scout sat rigid in the passenger seat, his nose twitching and his eyes scanning the horizon. Tom could feel the unease growing between them. They were heading into something they couldn't yet see. Halfway down the old logging road it happened. The engine sputtered, then died. Tom cursed under his breath as the truck rolled to a stop. He tried the ignition again, but it only clicked uselessly. Damn it, he muttered, glancing at Scout. The dog was no longer sitting. He was standing, his ears perked and his body tense. Before Tom could process it, the sound of laughter echoed from the woods. Then came the hum of engines, low at first, then louder, circling them like predators stalking their prey. Tom's heart pounded as he reached for the revolver. Stay close, Scout, he whispered. The first light came from the trees, a single motorcycle headlight piercing through the shadows, followed by another and another. The gang emerged slowly, surrounding the track like a pack of wolves. Marcus stepped off his bike first, his arm still bandaged from Scout's bite, and flashed a grin that sent chills down Tom's spine. Told you this wasn't over, Callahan, Marcus sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Tom stepped out of the truck, gun in hand, but his mind raced. For a way, you don't have to do this, Tom called, trying to keep his voice steady. You've made your point. Oh, we're just getting started, Marcus said, snapping his fingers to bikers approached the truck, banging on the windows and taunting Scout, who barked ferociously from inside. You think that dog can save you again, Marcus continued, laughing as if this was all a game. But Scout wasn't playing. With one swift motion, the dog lunged at the door handle, his powerful jaws wrenching it open. He left from the truck like a force of nature, landing inches from Marcus' teeth, beard and growls vibrating through the air. The gang froze for a moment, caught off guard by Scout's sheer intensity. Tom gripped his revolver tighter, knowing this was about to get much worse. For a brief, electrifying moment, everything stood still. Scout's growls filled the night, a deep primal sound that made even the toughest of the Devast hesitate. Marcus's cocky grin faltered as the dog held his ground, muscles taut and ready to strike. The gang circled tighter, their jeers now laced with uncertainty. Tom stood by the truck, revolver aimed, his breath steady but his mind racing. He knew this wasn't just a standoff, it was a test. One wrong move and blood would spill. Marcus was the first to break the silence. Call off the mud, Callahan, he snarled, trying to ask his unease. Tom didn't budge. You want me? Fine, but leave the dog out of this, Tom said, his voice firm. Marcus scoffed, shaking his head. Leave the dog out of it? That's cute. You think this is about you? He gestured toward Scout, his voice rising. That animal humiliated me, made me look weak in front of my crew. You think I'm walking away without making things right? Before Tom could respond, one of the bikers lunged at Scout with a heavy chain. It was a mistake. Scout moved faster than anyone could react, snapping onto the chain midair and yanking it. From the man's hands, the biker stumbled back, falling hard to the ground. Scout didn't stop there. He charged forward, forcing the gang to scatter in panic. The scene erupted into chaos. Engines roared to life as some tried to retreat while others fumbled to grab makeshift weapons. Tom stepped forward, firing a warning shot into the air. Enough, he bellowed, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. But Marcus wasn't done. He pulled a knife from his belt, his eyes wilded with anger. "You think you can scare us, old man?" he shouted, advancing toward Tom. Scout intercepted him, planting himself firmly between Marcus and his target. The gang leader froze, the knife trembling slightly in his hand for the first time. There was no bravado in his expression, just fear. Scout's growls deepened, his body low and ready to spring. Marcus took a shaky step back, realizing that he pushed too far. "This isn't over," he hissed, retreating to his bike. The gang began to scatter one by one, their confidence shaken. Marcus climbed onto his motorcycle, throwing one last glare at Tom and Scout before revving the engine. "You'll regret this, Callahan," he yelled, his words swallowed by the roar of the bikes as they disappeared into the night. Tom lowered his revolver, his chest heaving as the adrenaline began to fade. Scout returned to his side, his posture calm but his eyes still scanning the darkness. "Good boy," Tom murmured, kneeling to ruffle the dog's fur. But as he looked out of the empty road, he knew this was far from over. The Devastators had been humiliated, and men like Marcus didn't take losses lightly. What a tense scene. Scout showed loyalty and Tom stayed strong. "Do you think the Devastators will return, or is this the end? Share your thoughts." The morning light brought no comfort to Tom. He hadn't slept at all, his eyes fixed on the window as the night crawled by. Scout had stayed close, never leaving his side, his ears twitching at every creak of the house. Now, as the sun rose over Greenville, the world outside seemed deceptively calm, but Tom knew better. The Devastators weren't the kind to slink away quietly. They'd be back, and next time they wouldn't hold back. He loaded his revolver again, the metallic click echoing through the quiet house. "We've got to be ready, boy," he muttered, glancing at Scout, who stared back with unwavering focus. Tom's unease was confirmed when Chief Larson showed up at his door an hour later, his face grim. "Tom, they hit Miller's place left last night," Larson said. Without preamble, set fire to his workshop. He barely managed to put it out before the whole place went up. Tom felt a sickening churn in his stomach. "Did they leave a message?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Larson nodded. "They carved a skull into his door. I don't think they're stopping until they get what they want." Tom's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what they wanted him, but it was becoming clear they were willing to burn Greenville to the ground to get it. Back at the house, Tom paced the living room, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to act, to confront Marcus and put an end to this, but he couldn't risk Scout or the townspeople getting caught in the crossfire. He glanced at Scout, who sat by the door, his sharp eyes fixed on Tom as if waiting for a command. "We can't wait for them to come to us," Tom finally said, his voice low but resolute. He grabbed his old police radio from a dusty cabinet and called Larson. "I need backup. I'm going after them." There was a long pause before Larson responded. "Tom, you're retired. Let us handle this." Tom shook his head. "This isn't just about me anymore. They've made it about the whole town." By mid-off afternoon, Tom and Scout were on the move again, driving toward the outskirts of Greenville, where the Devastators were rumored to have a hideout. The truck bounced along the uneven dirt road, Scout standing in the passenger seat, his nose pressed to the cracked window. The woods grew denser as they approached the area, the shadows stretching long in the fading light. Tom's heart pounded as he pulled the truck to a stop. The place was eerily quiet. He stepped out, gripping his revolver tightly, and Scout followed, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. Then it happened, a distant crack like a branch snapping, followed by a low hum that quickly grew all louder. Tom spun around just as two motorcycles burst out from the trees, their riders shouting and revving their engines. Scout barked, furiously lunging forward as the bikers circled the truck. Tom raised his revolver, shouting, "Back off!" But before he could get a clear shot, another roar of engines erupted from behind. More bikes appeared, their headlights slicing through the trees. Tom and Scout were surrounded. The ambush had begun. The low rumble of engines filled the air, reverberating through the dense woods like an oncoming storm. Tom stood beside the truck, revolver gripped tightly in his hand, while Scout crouched low by his side, his body taut and his sharp eyes locked on the group of bikers circling them. Dust swirled up from the spinning tires, and mocking laughter broke out from the group, a cruel chorus of intimidation. Marcus, with his bandaged arm, slowed his bike to a stop and mounted, his boots crunching against the gravel. He stood tall, a smirk plastered across his face, clearly savoring the fear he thought he saw in Tom's eyes. "You don't get it, Callahan," Marcus sneered, spreading his arms in a theatrical gesture. "You're outnumbered, out of your depth. Should have just stayed on your porch and let us be." His gaze flicked toward Scout, who growled low in his throat, "And that dog of yours, he's the reason we're here. You want to protect him? Fine, let's see how far that loyalty gets you." Marcus's words carried a chilling finality, as if he was daring Tom to make the first move. Tom's heart pounded, but he held his ground. "You've already made your point, Marcus," he said, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "There's no reason for this to go any further. Turn around and walk away. Greenville doesn't need more trouble." But Marcus laughed, shaking his head. "Trouble's already here, old man. And now it's personal." He gestured to his crew, who tightened their circle around the truck. Scout growled louder, his body shifting slightly forward, waiting for a signal from Tom. Suddenly, one of the bikers revved his engine and lurched forward as if to speak. Scout, the dog, barked sharply, his stance firm, his presence enough to force the rider to veer off. The brief disruption broke the gang's rhythm, and Tom seized the moment. "You've got two choices," Tom said loudly, his voice cutting through the noise. "Leave now or face the consequences. I'm not scared of you, and neither is this dog." Marcus hesitated, his smirk faltering. For the first time he glanced at his crew, some of whom shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their confidence clearly shaken. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus waved a dismissive hand and climbed back onto his bike. "This isn't over, Callahan," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You think this town is safe? You think that dog's going to protect you forever?" "We'll see." One by one the bikers followed him, their engines roaring as they disappeared into the trees. The tension hung in the air long after they were gone, and Tom exhaled deeply. Lowering his revolver, he glanced down at Scout, who was still alert, his body trembling with controlled energy. "We held them off this time, buddy," Tom said, kneeling to scratch behind Scout's ears. "But we've got to be ready for what's next. They'll be back." The morning air was crisp, but the weight of the previous night lingered heavily in Tom's chest. He sat on the porch with Scout at his feet, the dog's eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. The quiet felt unnatural, as if Greenville itself was holding its breath. Tom sipped his coffee, his mind racing with thoughts of what Marcus might do next. The gang hadn't backed down. They'd simply retreated, regrouping for something bigger. Tom knew it, and so did Scout. "We're running out of time," Tom muttered, more to himself than to the dog. Determined to stay ahead of the gang, Tom spent the day reinforcing the property. He boarded up windows, fortified the doors, and made sure every lock and latch was secure. Scout followed him closely, his presence a constant reminder of why Tom couldn't afford to falter while working in the barn. Tom unearthed an old CB radio tucked away in a dusty crate. Wiped it clean and tuned it to the local police frequency if Marcus is planning something we'll hear about it, he said, setting it up in the living room. The static-filled hum of the radio added a new layer of tension to the already uneasy atmosphere. Later that afternoon, Chief L pulled up in his patrol car, his expression grim. Tom, we've got trouble, he said, stepping out of the vehicle. Reports are coming in about a group of bikers spotted near the town's water tower. Locals are nervous. Tom nodded, his jaw tightening. They're testing us, listen, trying to figure out how far they can push before we break. Listen sighed, leaning against his car. We've got patrols out, but this town doesn't have the resources to deal with them. I can send backup if it gets bad, but you and Scout might be on your own for a while. That night, Tom and Scout sat in the dimly lit living room, the radio crackling softly in the background. Tom cleaned his revolver methodically, the rhythmic motion helping to calm his nerves. Scout lay near the front door, his ears twitching at every small sound. The weight of the situation pressed down on Tom heavier than ever. I shouldn't have let it get this far, he said aloud, glancing at Scout. The dog tilted his head, his steady gaze a silent reassurance. We'll get through this, Tom continued, as much to himself as to Scout. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. Just before midnight, the radio crackled to life. A frantic voice came through the static. This is Henderson. They're out here on my property. Tom shot up, grabbing the revolver and strapping his holster around his waist. Scout was already on his feet, barking sharply as if to say, "Let's go." "Hang on, Henderson, we're coming," Tom said into the radio before rushing to the truck with Scout close behind. The truck roared to life as they sped down the dark road, the night closing in around them. Whatever was happening at the Henderson farm, Tom knew it would only be the beginning of what Marcus had planned. The gravel crunched beneath Tom's tires as the truck tore down the dark winding road toward Henderson's farm. The radio continued to crackle with Henderson's panicked voice, fragments of his plea for help breaking through the static. They're tearing it apart. Hurry. Tom gripped the steering wheel tighter, his heart pounding like a drum. Scout sat in the passenger seat, his body tense and his ears perked, ready for anything. The farmhouse came into view and Tom's stomach sank. Bright headlights lit up the yard as the Devastators circled the property on their bikes, their engines roaring like wild animals. Tom pulled to a stop, cutting the engine and stepping out cautiously. He could see Henderson on the porch, clutching a shotgun, but clearly outnumbered and overwhelmed. Marcus stood in the center of the chaos, his gang wrecking everything in sight. Fences knocked down, windows shattered, and the barn door swinging from its hinges. Marcus turned as Tom approached, his grin widening. "About time you showed up, Callahan," he called out, spreading his arms as if welcoming an old friend. "We were starting to think you'd given up." Tom stood firm, revolver in hand, but lowered. "It's over, Marcus. You've had your fun. Walk away now, and no one has to get hurt." Marcus laughed, a sharp grating sound that echoed through the yard. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about fun anymore. This is about respect, and you and that dog of yours took mine. Now I'm taking everything from you." With a snap of his fingers, he sent two bikers charging toward Tom, one armed with a chain, the other with a crowbar. Before Tom could react, Scout leapt from the truck, a blur of fur and muscle intercepting the first biker. The man stumbled back, dropping the chain as Scout barked furiously, driving him away. Tom raised his revolver, aiming at the second biker. "Stop right there," he barked, his voice cutting through the noise. The man hesitated, glancing back at Marcus, who waved him off with a sneer. "Let him play hero," Marcus said. "It won't matter." The gang pulled back slightly, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Tom moved toward Henderson, positioning himself between the farmer and the gang. Scout returned to his side panting but alert, his sharp eyes fixed on Marcus. "You've made your point," Tom said firmly. "Now leave." Marcus tilted his head, his grin fading for a moment. It seemed like he might back down, but then his expression hardened. "This isn't over, Callahan," he growled, climbing onto his bike. "You think you can protect this town forever? Think again." With AREV of his engine, he signaled the gang, and one by one they sped off into the night, leaving behind a trail of destruction. Tom exhaled slowly, lowering his revolver as the dust settled. Scout leaned against his leg, his presence grounding him. Henderson stepped forward, his voice shaky. "They'll be back, won't they?" Tom nodded grimly. "Yeah," he said, "and next time they won't hold back." The morning sun rose over Greenville, casting long shadows across the town as if bracing for the storm that was about to arrive. Tom stood on his porch, his revolver at his side and Scout at his feet. Every instinct told him that today would be the day Marcus wouldn't let his humiliation at the Henderson farm go unanswered. This time they wouldn't just vandalized property, they'd come to make a statement. Tom scanned the horizon, his heart heavy with both dread and resolve. He had made calls to Larson and a few trusted neighbors, warning them to stay clear. Whatever happened next, he and Scout would face it together. By late afternoon, the sound came, a distant rumble growing louder with every passing second. Tom stepped off the porch, his boots crunching on the gravel as he moved toward the gate. Scout stood beside him, his ears high and his body rigid. The gang came into view, their motorcycles lined up like a wall of roaring metal and fury. Marcus was at the center, his face set in a grim mask. This wasn't about intimidation anymore, it was war. The bike slowed to a halt and Marcus dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. "This is it, Callahan," he called out, his voice carrying over the engines. "You and me, no more games." Tom nodded, stepping forward. "Fine," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "But you leave Scout and this town out of it. You've got a problem with me, let's settle it." Marcus smirked, gesturing to his gang to stay back. "You've got guts, old man, I'll give you that." But before either of them could move, one of the gang members revved his engine and lunged forward, breaking the moment. Scout bolted into action, intercepting the bike with a powerful work that forced the rider to veer off. The chaos erupted instantly. Marcus's control over his crew crumbled as bikers rushed forward, ignoring his commands. Tom raised his revolver and fired a warning shot into the air. "Stand down," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Scout stayed close, barking and lunging to keep the bikers at bay. Marcus snarled in frustration, pulling out a crowbar and charging at Tom. The old sheriff sidestepped the attack, slamming his elbow into Marcus's side and knocking the weapon to the ground. The two men grappled, but Marcus was younger and stronger, forcing Tom back toward the porch. Scouts saw the struggle and sprang into action, darting between them and snarling at Marcus, who froze, his eyes wide with fear. The sudden intervention broke the gang's momentum. They began to retreat, their confidence shaken by Scout's relentless presence and Tom's determination. Marcus stumbled back, his hands raised in surrender. "Enough," he shouted, his voice trembling with frustration and exhaustion. "Young Callahan." One by one, the gang mounted their bikes, their engines roaring as they disappeared down the road. Tom stood, their chest heaving, revolver still in hand. Scout pressed against his leg, his fur bristling, but his gaze steady. Tom looked down at him, a tired smile breaking through. "We did it, boy," he said, quietly running a hand through Scout's coat as the dust settled and the town fell silent once more. Tom leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the road. He knew the devastators wouldn't be back, not after today. Scout sat beside him, his tail wagging slowly, a quiet triumph in his posture. "You're more than just a dog, Scout," Tom said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You're my partner, my family, and as the sun dipped. Below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Tom finally felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. Support our channel with a super stick. If you love emotional stories like this, show your support by sending a super stick. It's an amazing way to help keep creating these unforgettable moments for you. Click the chat icon below and choose your favorite. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you for being here with us.